Hey everyone, welcome to KSSP Podcast. I'm Spencer,
And I'm Katie.
and today we're going to be talking about rejection.
Alright, so the first thing I'm going to mention is rejection is just an inevitable part of life. So coping with it is an important skill to learn. It's always important to view the rejection objectively with as little personal bias as you can, so that you can analyze whether you have to change your behavior or if your suggestion was just not compatible with the person who rejected you. How did you make the other person feel, and how did they make you feel? Were either of you violating boundaries? Even if you are rejected, it's not the end of the world, and you can either learn and grow from the experience, or you can engulf yourself in shame or guilt and be miserable. And I know I've been guilty of both of these because I'm not perfect in any way. An important aspect for us personally to think about is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And this is common in disorders like ADHD. So, to break it down, rejection sensitivity means that you are much more likely to take a rejection personally than the average person. And dysphoria is being generally dissatisfied with life, and it often comes with cognitive distortions. It's important to recognize that the feeling you're feeling in that moment of rejection doesn't define who you are as a person. And Spencer was going to go over some more facts about RSD.
Yes. Are you ready for those?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Okay. So, I'll just kind of talk about, I kind of looked into RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, a little more. So, just because it's something that is very interesting to me because I feel like I have dealt with it. So then I also will have some personal stories to share. And then obviously, Katie, if you think of any while I'm talking about it or that maybe it relates to you, you can share those too. But or questions too. Because I like to talk about things and expand our minds. But okay, so rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's not technically officially an official recognized medical condition and also has limited scientific research available at the moment. And so, as a whole, it still needs more research, and it may affect people with more than ADHD, is also what I saw potentially. So, mainly, it's just something that I would. So, it's not like an official diagnosis. You can't go and get diagnosed with it, as far as I know. But it is still something that I feel like I've experienced. So, I still think it's important to kind of talk about and keep an open mind with, in a way. So, up to 99% of teens and adults with ADHD are more sensitive than usual to rejection. And some symptoms that I saw that they listed for rejection sensitive dysphoria would be very easy to feel embarrassed or self conscious, show signs of low self esteem or trouble believing in themselves, have trouble containing emotions when they feel rejected, may react with sudden shows of anger or rage, while others may burst into tears. Instead of losing control outwardly, some with RSD may turn their feelings inward. This can look like a snap onset of severe depression and sometimes can be mistaken for sudden emotional shifts that can happen with bipolar or BPD. Often can be people pleasers and become intensely focused on avoiding disapproval of others. May avoid starting tasks or projects when there's a chance of failure. And then can compensate by going all out or striving for perfectionism. So some things that RSD can be confused with commonly is bipolar, BPD, PTSD, OCD, depression, and or social phobia. And one main difference that the source that I use pointed out about RSD versus some of these other things is that an RSD episode is intense, but it doesn't last very long. And so with that, when I was first kind of, I guess I would say maybe learning about myself in a sense and trying to understand what was happening, I myself wondered if I had bipolar or kind of like a deep depression or something. Like I was just confused as to what I was experiencing. And so I have a really good psychiatrist that I still obviously have. But when we were trying to kind of figure this out, we wondered if it was bipolar, but to me it didn't quite make sense because in my head bipolar the episodes like last for periods of time. I don't know much about bipolar, but just with the little knowledge that I have on it,
Yeah,
it's
it's
that the
usually at
episodes
least 7 or
last.
more days.
Yeah, and for me, I wouldn't like the emotion would come on and be extremely intense that it would affect everything around me, but then it would dissipate within maybe an hour, like not even an hour. Some it depends on how long I was in the same situation for, as I'll talk about later. But it never like it wasn't a whole week thing. Like I would never had a week of feeling that rejection, sadness, or even like a happiness either. So that confused me. But I did try some medications that help treat bipolar and they just didn't work for me. And then eventually I was able to talk to my psychiatrist about RSD, but it wasn't something that she had much knowledge on because again, it's not something that I don't think it's talked about much, even with healthcare professionals. So it's something that she, in a sense, also had to kind of do a little bit of digging and research on as well. But I just kind of wanted to point out my experience that the feelings are definitely intense, but they don't last long like the typical cycles, I guess I would say, that you experience in like bipolar.
Yeah.
So for cause, researchers do know that social rejection, even when vague or uncertain, causes similar brain activity to pain. And they also know that the brain of someone with ADHD doesn't regulate internal communication the same way as the brain of someone without ADHD. The brain areas that filter and regulate signals aren't as active. This means there's less of a filter on brain activity. This difference in regulating internal communications is why people with ADHD commonly have trouble processing information from their senses. It also makes them prone to feeling overwhelmed by loud noises, bright lights, or sudden changes in what's happening around them. The brain of someone with ADHD might not be able to regulate pain like activity, which would explain why rejection is so much more troubling and painful to someone with RSD. And ADHD, as we talked about previously, has a genetic link, and with RSD being strongly linked with ADHD, they wonder if it might also have a genetic link. So, with RSD, they're not 100% sure on what is causing it, but just with the way that the ADHD brain kind of functions, they wonder if there's a link. But obviously, we know that correlation is not causation, so it's still something that needs to kind of be researched and looked into a little more. And then for treatment, so there are some medications. Obviously, with any before you'd have to talk to your provider about getting on medication, but there are some medications. I think one of them is a MAOI, supposedly, that has been shown to potentially work. And then there are two others, guanfacine and clonidine. And those are drugs that lower blood pressure but may help with RSD. And I, at one point, did take guanfacine. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I did try. I don't remember if it worked for me or why I quit. Like, I think when I finally was able, like, my psychiatrist and I were finally able to kind of figure out that that might be it and start that medication was also around the time that I was turning 26 and the good old 26, getting kicked
Oh
off your
man.
parents' healthcare insurance and
Yeah.
losing everything that you've worked for. is great. So, but and lately I haven't, like, I am back with that psychiatrist that I was with before I got kicked off my parents' insurance. So I'm grateful for that I was able to get back connected with her, but that took some time. But I don't think, I guess I haven't really readdressed starting that or anything with her either. So I'm not on it anymore. But I do think that it was something that might, I don't remember. I think I'd have to retry it to see if it actually worked or not. But those are potential options that have been shown to work. And then therapy, although it may not be directly helpful to like treat RSD because the experience does happen suddenly and without warning, but a therapist can help you get a handle on your emotions and deal with rejection in a positive way. So therapy can still be helpful, but just not as a treatment. Because I guess for me, I've had to also kind of learn that, kind of like change my mindset on it. Because before, obviously, I always felt like it was a bad thing, but it also is a part of me. So it's something that I've had to learn, kind of just like with ADHD in general, too. Just learning to live with it. I do have medication that I take for my ADHD, and I do think that also, like, I think they said stimulants can potentially also sort of help with RSD, but I mean, I still feel the
Yeah.
intense emotions, especially around rejection. But it's just something that I've learned. Like, I feel like I used to view it as a bad thing. Like, I would always, in a sense, hate myself whenever I felt that way because I felt, I don't know, weak or just negative about myself. But I've, in a sense, reframed my mindset that I don't know how I did it, but I just don't see it as a negative thing anymore because I feel like emotions are good, obviously to a certain extent, and it's gonna be, everyone's gonna have their own sense of maybe how like intense emotions they feel are good, if that makes sense. But for me, I've learned that my emotions are okay and it's okay to process them, but I can't let them control me. Even if they are super intense, I still can't let them, in a sense, control my actions. And that's actually helped me, but that might not help everyone. So again, that's something that I do think a therapist can be really helpful with.
Yeah. And I guess, I don't know, for me personally, like, as someone who's experienced like things like mania and like really severe depression, like emotions can sometimes just chemically get to a point where you don't have control over them, but that's what the medication is for. And that's what therapy is for too, to help you cope with
Yeah.
the remaining emotions.
Yeah. So
But
that's why it's
yeah,
important to have, like, I think a therapist or some, like, a psychiatrist definitely too, but any with any mental illness, it's just important to have, like, I guess a professional, I would say, because we're not like
yeah,
professionals. We're talking about personal anecdotes, I think is what we'd
right.
call them. But I do think that those are important. But obviously, it's gonna still come down to having that professional who can help,
You
like,
and your specific
guide you and stuff.
situation.
But
Yeah.
hmm?
I was saying, like, who can help you in your specific situation?
Yes, yes,
Because everybody's different.
100, yes, yep. So then I just have a couple of experiences that I feel like kind of helped me, in a sense, more like once, especially after I did some of this kind of digging more into RSD, it just kind of helped me make sense of maybe why I felt the way I felt, which I feel like for me is just, it just helps in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll first start off by, we can talk about some nursing experiences that I went through. So in the summer between my second and third semester of nursing school, we had that summer off. So we didn't have school, but I did an internship, a nursing internship. So I feel like when I was doing that nursing internship, I definitely experienced some of that rejection sensitive dysphoria. So it was a good experience. I'll start by saying that. I'm not going to discredit that experience at all. And the people around me were great. Like working with them during this internship, I would call it, was amazing. They were great people. And I know that none of them like would have wished anything, or at least I don't believe that any of them would have wished anything bad on me. And I don't think they do or did. So, like, none of this is anything against them. It's just my reaction to the situation, I guess I would say, or experience. Because when I was doing my internship, I was paired with a nurse, as anyone who did the nursing internship was paired with one nurse and then worked with them. I think we did 9 weeks, 12 weeks, but we did full time and we were paid. So that was nice. And the nurse that I was paired with was overnights. So I personally did like that because I had been working overnights as like a heart monitor tech already. So sticking with overnights just worked out for me, anyways. But it also was, I think, in retrospect, just kind of hard because obviously at night the hospital generally is quiet just because there's not as much ancillary staff, there's not as many patient families, there's less. I wouldn't say necessarily 100% less nurses, but a lot of times it's just less people around. So in a sense I would say there's more chances to feel kind of isolated and alone. So the nurse that I was paired with was working in our ICU, which was amazing. It was a great experience for me to be able to see those more kind of critically sick patients because I feel like it really helped cement some topics that I still, in a sense, struggled with. So it was a great experience overall. But the way that the nurses station was set up in that ICU was that it was like two L shapes that were separated from each other. And then across from each of those L-shaped desks was patient rooms, so they didn't even like sit across from each other. They were like literally almost isolated from each other. And they each only had three or four computers at them. So obviously, there in our ICU we had I think four nurses at a time. Either way, one of the desks was filled with the nurses, which then left me, and not in a negative way, but then and not every shift either, but then every once in a while that left at least somebody over on the other L-shaped desk kind of isolated, which I don't even think a lot of people necessarily minded it because it wasn't a bad thing to be over there. But I think my rejection sensitive dysphoria just kind of made it feel almost like I was being rejected in a way. Because with rejection sensitive dysphoria, it also can just be perceived rejection. So it doesn't even have to be real in a sense. Like I can just see somebody maybe give me a glance and mistake that, or like their tone may sound off. It can be anything really. It can be a perceived rejection, and you are going to experience it whether you want to. It's not a choice, obviously. I would never choose to feel like that intense sadness from somebody not liking me, But so it definitely affected me during that experience. But for me, I also didn't obviously lash out at the people around me, whether because I always tried to, in a sense, logicalize it, like make it logical, but it also isn't a logical thing. It's a very emotional experience. Like logic isn't necessarily, at least for me, wasn't going to bring me out of it, but I also tried to make it logical in the sense that I was internalized it and made myself feel dumb for feeling that way. Like I was like, you're stupid. They don't, like, I didn't process the emotions, which I think is a big part for me during these experiences, that I have to process the emotion. So that was something that I struggled with during the internship. And then I think just in general, that's also why nursing was kind of hard for me, is because as a nurse, it just feels impossible to please everyone. Like whether that's the doctor, the patient, patient's family member, coworker, ancillary staff, it's just impossible to please that. And I feel like that's just normal part of life. You can't please everyone. But for me, it was just hard to not take it personally. And again, I personally attribute that to my RSD. And it could be other things. I'm not going to necessarily blame everything on RSD. But that to me just helps me understand why I think that I felt that way. And it helps me, in a sense, cope with the experiences that I've had too and learn from them, I think, too. So I think that is also sometimes why nursing was just difficult for me, because it's impossible to please everyone. And that's just, again, a reality. We can't please everyone, nor should we necessarily want to, because that's not what life is about either. And then another part, like another, I guess, life experience that RSD has helped me kind of understand in a sense is when I was starting something new. Because, again, as I mentioned, it's hard for people with RSD to want to start something new, because if there's that chance of failure, then it's hard to actually go through with it. But for me, that's why I feel like, especially in the beginning, so I just think that's why it's been hard for me to start things, even if I'm passionate about it. So I would say, kind of like our music video that we made forever ago, like I was still definitely nervous about doing that, but that received okay reception. So I think that's why I didn't take it down. But I also wrote a book, not maybe a couple of years ago while I was in nursing school, that didn't, I mean, it didn't get any, like nobody read it, I don't think, or saw it ever. But I think the fear of somebody reading it and not liking it is what made me eventually take it down and delete any post about it. And that's why I'm also kind of proud of myself in a way with my business that I started, because even though I'm still nervous about rejection at times, I've kept it up. I haven't let myself, in a sense, give up on it. So that's something that I've been able to see through, and I'm still seeing through, which I is something that's big for me. And even with our podcast, because I still feel like even one dislike or one negative comment still affects me in a way. But I'm able to, like, I think I still take it personally, and I think I always will, but I don't let it, in a sense, control me. Because, again, this is just for me personally. I understand that not everyone, like, emotions can be intense to where they can control you, but for me, I'm able to not let it control me. So again, that's not going to work for everyone. I understand that, but for me, I'm able to not let it control me to the point where I would say, "Oh, I don't want to do this anymore," because I am, in a sense, afraid of, like, the rejection we might get, or like the mean comments or the dislikes or anything like that. Like, I don't let it control me anymore. But I understand that that's not everyone is like, that's not a possibility for everyone, and it's not an easy thing to do either. And it takes time and kind of patience with yourself too. But I think, in a sense, that's just how RSD has affected me. And sometimes it's still sad to think about kind of what could have been, because it's also, I know it's kept me from, like, relationships, friendships. It's just kept, I personally feel like it's taken a lot from my life. But I am, like, I'm not okay with it, but it's also something that I, in a sense, have to be okay with, because I can't change it now. So for me, I just look forward to the future and kind of learning to navigate and not let it keep me from potential different future, whatever that could be. I don't, relationship, friendship, jobs, I don't know, whatever it could be. I just am not going to let it keep me, even if I do experience rejection. Like you said, that's just a natural part of life. And I think it's better for me, because another thing with RSD is that, like I mentioned earlier, it can sometimes be mistaken for, what is that, social phobia, because a lot of times it's, and I felt this way, it's easier, or it felt easier to not try, because obviously if you don't try, then you're not going to get the rejection. So you're not going to feel it. You're not going to go through that rejection sensitive dysphoria, because if I don't put myself out there, I can't get rejected, so I don't have to go through it. But I don't like living that way anymore. So for me, it's just something that I'm working on. And again, I think it's something that isn't really known about in general, so it's not really talked about much. So maybe others kind of experience it and just don't know what it is, you know? Like that's how I felt when I was trying to navigate my life. I guess I just was like, why? Like this doesn't make sense, and nobody can, it just felt like no one could help me either. But that is why I'm grateful that I had a psychiatrist who was able to kind of work with me. And then also I did have some therapists who, therapy has just always been hard for me to maintain, but I do think therapy is obviously good and it is very helpful. But I'm grateful that I've had, and just the people in my life too, that have helped me kind of navigate life, I guess. But yeah, so I think, I don't know, that's, I think I covered most of my like just how it has affected me, but it's just something that I've, and I still, it still obviously affects me, and I don't know, because there's no cure for it either in a sense. So I don't know if there ever, because there's not really a cure for ADHD either, but I don't know if there ever will be or necessarily needs to be in a sense. But it is something that medication and therapy can help with too if you need that. So, but again, it just has helped me understand some things that I've gone through in life and why I may have acted the way that I did to, or felt the way that I felt in those experiences. Even though logically I knew it didn't make sense, but it was something that I now understand I wasn't really in control of either. Because we're not in control. We can't control our emotions. I definitely, like, nobody, in my opinion, can control their emotions. Like, you can use medication to help manage them, but I don't think we can ever fully control them. At least, like, if, because even with severe depression, I think the medication just helps manage. I don't think it, but it can alleviate them too. So alleviation can help, but I don't think anybody can control the emotions, if that makes sense. And like the emotions, like I feel like obviously depression and some of those other, and like bipolar, it's different because I feel like a lot of times with those disorders, you're not necessarily having an emotional response to an experience, whereas with RSD, that emotional response is due to the rejection in a sense. You know, like it's not a biological thing. And that's why it's also, in a sense, I think sometimes hard to treat because it's not biological.
Yeah.
Like it still is in a sense, but it's, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not like, because the experience being intense and deeply emotional is still biological, but it isn't to the fact where like it can happen at any time, but a lot of times it's going to happen in response to something,
Okay.
if that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's just helped me understand my life more, is the main
Yeah.
point that I want to get across. And maybe if it helps somebody else, that's awesome. And or maybe it's something that somebody can have a conversation with about, like their therapist or psychiatrist sometime, just to see if like maybe they know more about it too, because obviously they are the professionals. But yeah, it's just something that I wanted to talk about because it has
For
affected
sure.
me, and I just don't think a lot of people know about it. So, and maybe they do, and maybe I just didn't know about it, and that's fine too. But it's something that has affected me, and I just wanted to talk about. So
Yeah. Okay.
that is just how it has affected me. But
Cool.
I don't know if you have anything else just about rejection or
Not really.
no. Okay. But yeah, so rejection is rejection, I guess. But if you guys want to leave us a comment in below on this video, just letting us know what you want us to talk about in future episodes, you can do that here.
You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And we do Twitch live streams now sometimes too.
Yes, so make sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you can be notified when we do. And we will see you guys next time.